Yes, I understand the risks, but look at the names on page 3. We proceed as planned, quietly.
The audit clearly shows the discrepancies, sir. And I cannot in good conscience ignore it, no matter the consequences.
Something happened in a recording studio corridor in Lagos on a Wednesday morning in March that nobody planned. Not the woman sitting behind the reception desk. Not the man walking past it. Not the industry that had spent 2 years trying to make sure a moment like this would never come for her. Nobody planned it, but someone arranged it. And that is the difference between coincidence and divine intention. Coincidence has no memory. It does not track what was stolen from you. It does not build corridors through the wreckage of your worst seasons and place the exact right person at the exact right door at the exact right moment. Coincidence does not work that hard. But God does. This is not a story about a woman who overcame. Overcoming sounds like something you do with willpower and determination and the right mindset. This is bigger than that. This is a story about a woman who was genuinely, thoroughly, systematically broken by someone who had power over her, and about the God who never once looked away from her in the breaking, who never canceled the assignment on her life, who never moved the mandate to someone more convenient, and who built a corridor through the ruins of what that wicked man did and placed a Korean music producer named Park Junho at the end of it. Junho did not know he was part of a plan. He thought he was just booking studio time. He had no idea that the woman at the front desk was the reason the corridor existed. But before we get to the corridor, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to a plastic chair in a kitchen in Enugu and a 4-year-old girl who opened her mouth and made her mother stop washing dishes and turn around with an expression that Chisom would not have a word for until she was much older. The word was awe. Her mother dried her hands on her apron and looked at her 4-year-old daughter standing on that plastic chair and said quietly, like she was saying it to God rather than to the child, that ability. That is not just yours. That belongs to something bigger than both of us. Chisom grew up understanding that the ability inside her was not hers to keep. It was hers to carry, hers to develop, hers to pour out for the specific purpose it had been placed in her to serve. She studied music with the seriousness of someone who understands that a gift is also a responsibility. She learned arrangement and composition and the technical architecture of sound alongside the raw natural ability she had been born with. She graduated at the top of her class. She wrote compositions in her final year that made her lecturers go quiet in the particular way that people go quiet when they encounter something that exceeds what they were expecting. She was going to change things. She knew it the way you know the things that were decided about you before you arrived. And then she walked into the offices of Meridian Entertainment on a Monday morning in January and shook the hand of the man who would spend the next 2 years methodically, deliberately and completely dismantling everything she had built inside herself. His name was Victor Ease. And he was the most dangerous kind of wicked, the kind that wears the face of opportunity. He had seen her coming before she saw him. He had watched her final year showcase performance from the back of the auditorium with the calculating attention of a man who was not watching art. He was watching an asset. He was watching something he could use. And by the time Chisom walked into his office for the interview, he had already decided exactly what her ability was worth to him and exactly how much of that worth she would ever see. He told her she was extraordinary. He told her the industry needed her. He told her that Meridian Entertainment was the platform that would take what she had and show it to the world. He used every word that a young woman who has been told since childhood that she is carrying something important wants to hear from someone with the power to confirm it. She signed the contract on a Tuesday. She did not fully understand what she had signed until 8 months later when she heard a composition she had written playing on a Lagos radio station credited to an artist she had never met, produced under Victor Ease's personal label, generating revenue that would never find its way to her account. She went to his office. He sat behind his desk with the particular calm of a man who has had this conversation before, and has never once lost it, and looked at her across the mahogany and said that her contract assigned all creative output produced during her employment to the company, that she had signed it, that the signature was hers, that if she had questions about the terms she should have read more carefully before putting her name on the page. She stood in his office doorway on the way out and felt something she had never felt before in her entire life. Not anger. Something quieter and more permanent than anger. The feeling of a door closing. She stayed. Not because she wanted to, but because the contract bound her and breaking it would cost more than she had. She stayed and she watched it happen 2 more times. A vocal arrangement she spent 3 weeks perfecting, appearing on an album that did not contain her name. A full composition she wrote in a weekend of inspired sleeplessness, becoming the title track of a campaign that won awards at an industry event she was not invited to attend. And all the while Victor Ease smiled at her across boardroom tables and told other people in her presence that she was a valued member of the Meridian family, while his assistant quietly and systematically responded to every external inquiry about her availability with the same message. Chisom is not currently taking outside work. When she finally left, when the contract finally expired and she walked out of those offices on a Friday afternoon with a box of her personal items and the hollow lightness of someone who has been comprehensively emptied, she discovered what the 2 years had truly cost her beyond the compositions and the credits and the money. They had cost her the industry. Victor Ease had spent the 2nd year of her contract making phone calls. Quiet ones. The kind that do not leave evidence but leave impressions. The kind that mean that when a young woman with an extraordinary ability and a complicated story tries to walk through an industry door, she finds it already slightly closed before she reaches it and can never quite identify why. She tried for 6 months after leaving Meridian. She sent demonstrations. She attended showcases. She reached out to people she had known in university who were building careers in music. She got polite responses and vague interest and meetings that led nowhere, and a slowly accumulating understanding that the narrative about her in the industry was not her narrative and she did not have the power or the resources to rewrite it. On the morning of the 7th month, she sat at her kitchen table in her small Lagos apartment and opened her laptop to work on a composition she had been building for 3 weeks. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. She did not open it again for a very long time. She found the front desk job at Lighthouse Recording Studio through a job listing website. Administrative coordinator. Competitive salary. No music experience required. She applied without thinking about it too hard because the rent was due, and thinking too hard about anything to do with music had become something she could not afford to do. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she was simply regrouping. She told herself a great many things in the first months of sitting behind that reception desk that she mostly did not believe but needed to say anyway to get through the days. Her faith did not disappear. She needs you to understand that. She never stopped believing in God. She stopped believing that God's original plan for her was still intact. She prayed. Short, careful, practical prayers. The prayers of a person who has learned to want less because wanting less means less can be taken. She read her Bible in the evenings. She attended a small church on Sunday mornings and sat in the middle rows and sang the worship songs quietly enough that nobody near her could hear her, and left immediately after the service ended. She had stopped asking God about the mandate. She had decided in the quiet and private way that wounded people make their heaviest decisions that the mandate had simply found someone else. That God, being practical and purposeful, had not waited for her to recover, but had moved the assignment to someone better positioned to carry it. She believed this completely. She was completely wrong. Now, before this story goes any further, I need to stop and speak directly to you. Not to everyone watching. To you specifically. Because somebody watching this video right now has had something taken from them by someone who had power over them. Somebody watching this right now made the same quiet private decision Chisom made. That God moved the assignment somewhere else. That the mandate found someone more available. That the thing you were born to carry was either lost in what happened or simply outgrew its willingness to wait for you. And I need you to hear this clearly before we go any further. You are wrong about that, just like Chisom was wrong. At Afro Soul Tales, this is what we are here for. This is the mandate on this channel, to find you in the middle of your Wednesday morning, in the middle of your ordinary day, in the middle of whatever front desk you are sitting behind right now, telling yourself the assignment moved on without you, and to tell you through every story we tell that God does not abandon what he places in a person. He builds corridors. He places people. He arranges Wednesday mornings. He is infinitely more patient and infinitely more purposeful than any wicked CEO who ever sat behind a mahogany desk and thought he had the final word. Nobody does this the way we do it. And we are just getting started. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell. Every Friday a new story drops on this channel, and every single one of them is built on this same unshakable foundation. That God's plan for your life cannot be canceled by any human being regardless of their title, their power, or their phone calls. And drop a comment below right now and tell me, where are you watching from today? I want to know what city, what country, what corner of this world you are in right now. Because this community spans every continent and every time zone, and every story we tell here belongs to all of us together. Tell me where you are watching from. I read every single comment. Every one. Now, let us go back to Chisom. Because the corridor is about to appear. Park Junho came to Lighthouse Recording Studio on a Wednesday morning in March to book studio time for an independent project he was producing for a young Yoruba folk artist who had been referred to him by a musician in Abuja. He was 36 years old, Korean Nigerian, raised between Lagos and Seoul in the particular in-between space of a child whose parents had decided that two cultures were better than one and had raised him accordingly. He was not famous. He drove a car that was reliable rather than impressive. He had lunch every day at the same small restaurant 2 streets from the studio, and was known by the woman who ran it as the quiet Korean man who always asked how her children were doing and always left a generous tip. In 15 years of working in music, he had built a reputation that existed entirely by word of mouth among people who cared more about the work than about the industry around it. He found artists that the mainstream had overlooked or broken or discarded, and he helped them make the truest version of the work they were capable of making. He had no interest in owning what he helped create. He simply wanted to be in the room when something real happened. He walked through the Lighthouse reception area on his way to the studio corridor at 11:14 on a Wednesday morning, and he heard Chisom. She was not singing. She was not performing. She was sitting behind the reception desk sorting through booking files with the focused administrative efficiency she had developed over 18 months of making herself useful in a room that had nothing to do with what she was built for. And she was humming. Not consciously. The way people hum when they are alone with a task and their mind drifts to the place it most naturally goes when nobody is watching. A melody. Something she had written 3 years earlier in the last weeks before everything at Meridian collapsed. A composition she had never finished because by the time she got to the final movement the CEO had already taken everything else and she had stopped trusting herself to complete anything. She did not know anyone was in the corridor. Junho stopped walking. He stood outside the reception area entrance and listened without moving and without making a sound for 45 seconds. Then he walked in. Chisom looked up and stopped humming immediately, the professional reception desk expression returning to her face the way a curtain drops. He said, "Where did that melody come from?" She said, "I am sorry. I did not realize anyone could hear me. It was nothing." He said, "I have been working in music for 15 years. That is not nothing. Where did it come from?" A pause. The kind of pause that happens when a question reaches past the professional surface and touches something that has been carefully put away. "I wrote it," she said, "a long time ago. It is not finished." He looked at her for a moment with a stillness that was not uncomfortable but simply completely present. Then he said, "Would you be willing to finish it?" "No," she said. "Simply and completely." "No." He nodded. He booked his studio time. He thanked her. He left. She sat behind the reception desk for the rest of that Wednesday and told herself the conversation meant nothing and almost believed it. He came back on Thursday. Not to talk to her about the melody. He had booked a second session. He came in, nodded at her, went to the studio, worked for 4 hours, came out, thanked her as he passed and left. He came back on Friday, and the Monday after that, and the Wednesday after that. He was not engineering accidental encounters. He was not performing interest. He had simply found a studio that suited his work and he was using it. But every time he passed the reception desk he said good morning or good afternoon with the simple genuine courtesy of a person for whom courtesy is not strategy but simply how they move through the world. He asked once how long she had worked at Lighthouse. He asked once what part of Nigeria she was from, and when she said Enugu he told her that he had recorded a project there years ago, and the city had stayed in him in a way he could not fully explain. He never asked about the melody again. He did not need to. It was already there between them the way the first note of a song establishes the key. Everything that follows is heard in relation to it. 3 months after the Wednesday he first heard her, Juno came into the studio on a Thursday evening for what was supposed to be a 6-hour session with the Yoruba folk artist who had that same afternoon called to cancel because of a family emergency. Juno came anyway. He had a deadline for a different project and the studio was already booked and paid for, and he worked better with professional equipment than at home. He set up his session. He worked for 2 hours on the arrangement of a track that needed a guide vocal to make sense of the emotional arc he was building toward. Every session singer he knew with the right voice for the tone of the piece was unavailable. He tried 3. He got 3 voicemails. At 9:30 in the evening Chisom came past the studio corridor on her way to the small staff kitchen to make tea before the final hour of her shift. The studio door was ajar. She heard the track playing through the monitors, the instrumental, the arrangement, the unmistakable shape of a song that knows exactly what it wants to be and is waiting for the one thing it needs to become it. She stood outside the door. Juno saw her through the glass of the control room. He did not call to her. He simply met her eyes through the glass with an expression that was not asking anything of her, simply acknowledging that she was there. She pushed the door open. She said, "You need a vocal." He said, "Yes." She said, "What kind?" He turned back to the mixing desk and pulled up the arrangement notes and talked her through it. Not the way someone talks to a vocalist they are directing. The way someone talks to another musician they are thinking alongside. He used technical language without simplifying it and watched her follow every word of it with the quiet confirmation of someone for whom this language has always been native. When he finished she said, "What key?" He said, "I was thinking F-sharp minor, but I am open." She stood in the doorway of the control room for a moment. Then she walked to the recording booth door. She opened it. She went inside. She put on the headphones. She adjusted the microphone to her height with the practiced automatic movement of someone who has done this 1,000 times and has not done it in 3 years and finds that the body remembers what the mind tried to forget. She looked through the glass at Juno at the mixing desk. He pressed play. The track began, and Chisom opened her mouth. What came out of her in the next 3 minutes and 52 seconds was not a guide vocal. It was not a placeholder. It was not a demonstration of technical competence or professional ability. It was 3 years of a locked room opening. It was every composition that had been taken and every credit that had been stolen and every door that had been quietly closed and every morning she had sat behind a reception desk telling herself the mandate had found someone else. All of it pouring out of her and being transformed by the act of pouring into something so devastating and so beautiful and so completely beyond what the track had been before she sang it that Juno sat at the mixing desk and did not move and did not breathe and did not touch a single control for the entire 3 minutes and 52 seconds. When it ended, the studio was completely silent. Chisom stood in the recording booth with the headphones around her neck and looked through the glass. Juno sat at the mixing desk with his hands flat on the surface on either side of the board and his head bowed slightly forward and his eyes closed. The silence lasted a long time. Then he raised his head and looked at her through the glass. And he said, "Chisom, I need you to hear something and I need you to really hear it." She waited. He said, "I do not know everything that happened to you. I know enough to understand that someone with authority used it to make you believe that what is inside you belongs to them or belongs to no one. I need you to know that they were wrong. Not mistaken. Not misguided. Wrong. What I just heard in that booth is not something that belongs to a contract or a company or a man behind a mahogany desk or an industry that could not see past its own interests." He paused. He said, "That ability was placed in you before any of those people existed. And it will outlast every single one of them. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has the authority to bury what God put in you deliberately. Not a CEO. Not a contract. Not 2 years of someone else's theft. Not 3 years of silence. Not the front desk of a recording studio. Nothing on this earth has that authority." Chisom stood in the recording booth on the other side of the glass and felt something happen in her chest that she did not have an immediate word for. It was not relief exactly. It was not joy exactly. It was not the dramatic sudden healing that stories sometimes promise, as if wounds that took years to inflict can be undone in a single moment. It was smaller than all of those things and more permanent than any of them. It was the feeling of a sentence she had told herself for 3 years. The mandate found someone else, being quietly and completely and irrevocably replaced by its opposite. The mandate never left. It was waiting. It was always waiting. What followed was not a straight line. Real restoration never is. There were sessions where she sang and sessions where she sat in the corner and could not. There were days when the 3 years felt like they were still happening and days when they felt like something she was reading about rather than living inside. There were conversations with Juno that went late into the night and covered ground she had never covered with anyone because she had never before been in the presence of someone who listened without an agenda for what they were hearing. There was a counselor, a real one. Someone qualified and trustworthy and wise who helped her go back into the pain with the specific and necessary work of processing what had been done to her rather than simply performing recovery on top of it. This was not the romantic part of the story. This was the essential part. The part without which nothing else would have held. There were phone calls to her mother in Enugu that left both of them in tears of a kind that are indistinguishable from gratitude. There was the morning Chisom sat at her kitchen table and opened her laptop and found the unfinished composition she had closed 3 years earlier and did not close it again. There was the evening 3 weeks later when she played it to Juno in the studio and watched him listen with his eyes closed and his head slightly tilted, and when he opened his eyes he said, "This is the one. This is the piece the whole world needs to hear." There was the recording. 3 days in the studio, just the two of them and the engineer, building the finished version of the composition that had been waiting 3 years to exist in its complete form. There was the morning she heard the final mix played back through the studio monitors and sat in the control room chair and did not speak for a very long time. And there was a Sunday morning approximately 8 months after the Wednesday in the corridor when Chisom walked through the doors of a church she had been attending quietly for 6 weeks, and instead of taking her usual seat in the middle rows she walked all the way to the front. The worship leader saw her coming and without a word handed her a microphone. The congregation did not know who she was. They did not know about Meridian Entertainment or Victor Ease or 3 years of a locked room or a Wednesday morning in March when a Korean music producer stopped walking in a corridor because something extraordinary was happening in an ordinary moment. They did not know about the mandate or the 3 minutes and 52 seconds or the unfinished composition or the counselor or the phone calls to Enugu. They simply heard her when she opened her mouth. And one by one, starting from the front row and moving backward through the entire congregation like a tide, every person in that church went still. Because some abilities are not just abilities. Some gifts are not just gifts. Some voices are not just voices. Some things are placed in a person deliberately, for a purpose larger than any single career or any single industry or any single wicked man behind a mahogany desk who thought he had the final word. Victor Ease did not have the final word. He never did. The corridor God built was longer than Chisom expected and harder to walk than any story makes it sound. But it led exactly where it was always going to lead. To a microphone in a church in Lagos. To a composition that a wicked CEO never got his hands on because God kept it unfinished until the right hands were available to finish it with. To a Korean music producer who came to book studio time and ended up being placed in a corridor at exactly the right moment by a God who does not waste a single piece of what he places in a person. The mandate was never cancelled. It was never transferred. It was never lost. It was simply waiting in a corridor that God had been building the entire time. And it had Chisom's name on it. It always did. If the story found something in you today, and I believe it did, I want you to do two things before you close this video. First, drop a comment below right now and tell me where you are watching from. What city? What country? What corner of this world? Because this community is everywhere, and every time someone tells me where they are watching from, it reminds me of why this channel exists and why these stories matter. Tell me where you are. I read every single comment. Every one without exception. Second, share this story today with one person in your life who has had something taken from them by someone who had power over them. One person who closed a laptop and told themselves the mandate found someone else. One person who is sitting behind their own version of a reception desk right now believing a lie that a wicked person told them about their own ability. Send it to them. Today. Not tomorrow. Today. Because the corridor God is building for them might have this story in it. Subscribe to Afro Soul Tales for a new story every single Friday. Stories of faith. Stories of love. Stories of the God who builds corridors through ruins and places people at exactly the right door at exactly the right moment. Turn on your notification bell so you never miss a single one. God bless you. I will see you Friday. Dove.